As Gary said earlier, it is clear that we are in a very different economic and political environment than we were at this time a year ago. We have a new administration in Washington, a larger Democratic majority in the U.S. House and Senate, and notable changes in congressional leadership positions. As we are meeting today, Congress is continuing work, you heard this from the majority leader, on the comprehensive energy and climate change bills. And clearly nuclear has a role to play in both bills. This is a more vigorous dialogue of energy policy issues broadly and nuclear specifically than we've had in many years. And maybe very important from discussions that went on yesterday and things we'll be talking about throughout these days and a half, outside the Beltway, in state legislatures throughout the Southeast, and in states such as Ohio, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and even California, there are deliberations on the future role of nuclear energy in their respective energy policies. At the same time, a global economic crisis is weighing on all of the major economies and industries. You see it here in our country in the income statements of the companies, in a growing backlog of customer payments from those hardest hit by the downturn, and in the cost of raising capital for new energy projects. However, even considering the impact of the recession, the U.S. Energy Information Administration projects that the U.S. economy will begin a slow recovery in 2010 with a modest 1.9% increase in GDP and a 1.2% increase in total electricity consumption. Those won't be enough to offset the projected declines in both areas this year, but it's moving in the right direction. Worldwide, the International Energy Agency last week reported that the global surge in the use of consumer electronics such as flat-screen TVs, iPods, mobile phones, will triple electricity consumption by 2030 to about 1,700 terawatt hours. Although forecasts vary somewhat, all of them suggest that the economic decline has slowed and that a turnaround, probably a long, slow turnaround, will start sometime in the not-too-distant future. In the midst of these political and economic changes, the importance of nuclear energy to our electric operations portfolio and our environment is more significant than ever. As the chairman said, you can have a scenario with distributed generation. Google is pushing things like that. I don't think that's very rational in the near term compared to a scenario that has baseload electricity as still the foundation of our system, and that's what we see. And particularly when you look at where we may go with plug-in hybrids, with a greater electrification of our economy to reduce carbon emissions, not just from the electricity sector, but from the industrial sector. So one critical element of our long-term planning is navigating change in this political leadership here in Washington. As I mentioned a little while ago while I was stalling for time, I really think nuclear has good bipartisan support in Congress, and we're continuing our outreach to maintain and expand that base of support. It's absolutely essential. It includes building relationships with the leadership and those who are new to Capitol Hill, and reaching out to those members of Congress whose positions on nuclear energy is not well defined yet, or may be reshaped based on emerging issues such as climate change and jobs creation. As an example, a few weeks ago, NEI sponsored a bipartisan briefing for 23 House members that was co-hosted by one of the nuclear twins, the Majority Whip James Clyburn, and Congressmen John Spratt and Zach Wamp, who lead the House Nuclear Issues Working Group. Speakers from the industry, the environmental community, organized labor, and a moderate Democratic think tank briefed the members on various aspects of our industry, and this was prior to the debate that's going on right now on shaping climate change and forming the energy bill. We're working with national and state-based coalitions in states such as New York, Vermont, Pennsylvania, Texas, New Jersey, and alliances with organizations of all stripes. We're attempting to broaden the base of support for nuclear energy. Importantly, these organizations are communicating their support to their members of Congress and state leaders on a regular basis. We're calling this an echo effect back here in DC, and it's something that we're going to be pushing hard and asking for your help on. We briefed new members of Congress and the new leadership during its first months in session. Given the performance of today's nuclear facilities, as reported earlier by Gary, and the widely recognized role of nuclear energy in our nation's energy and climate change policy, we believe the industry is really well positioned among many in Congress. But we still have a great deal of work to do, and we are looking to mobilize your participation in this education and advocacy effort. We need to do both. We need to educate and we need to advocate our positions effectively. You heard from Gary, and we only had one young gen member here because all the others are up on the hill. There's 240 or 50 of them up there making almost 50 visits with members and staff, and that's why they're not in the audience right now. During the course of this meeting, representatives of our member companies will be meeting with their congressional leaders, as well as the Congressional Black Caucus and moderate Democrats. Last week, Patrick Moore of the Clean and Safe Energy Coalition briefed the vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and other members of Congress. He also met with the executive director of the National Black Caucus of state legislators. See a theme here? We're going to states as well as Congress. It's not just in Washington that we can win this. Jeff Archie, who I think is in the audience and is the site VP at Summer Station, briefed that group, the same group, the Black Caucus of state legislators, on nuclear issues last weekend at its spring policy forum. And we're already planning a follow-up briefing for the organization's annual legislative conference this summer in Philadelphia. This is the kind of sustained effort we need to replicate on a regular basis from all segments of our industry and those organizations that support the industry. NEI works closely with your companies to represent the nuclear industry's policy interest in Washington and outside the Beltway. Your success in operating nuclear plants safely, Gary talked about earlier, reliably and efficiently, is the absolute foundation of our public and political support. Nothing, and nothing by a far stretch, is more important to our ability to help you than continuing to operate safe and reliable plants across our country. I can't emphasize how important that is, whether it's in regulatory space or in political space. That's the key to us being able to help on any issue we're dealing with in this town. Early this morning, Gary briefed us on the status of new nuclear plant development. The quest for new energy supplies and the growing concern about climate change makes it clear that nuclear energy and other low-carbon electric generating sources are needed worldwide to meet both goals. More than 40 nuclear plants are under construction around the world, including advanced reactor designs that U.S. companies are going to be building here. About half of those projects being constructed have startup dates ranging from a year from now to 2016. Given our nation's growing need for energy and concern about carbon emissions, there is no question in our mind that we will build more nuclear plants. We are developing new nuclear projects at a time when the public and policymakers are charmed by the allure of renewable energy sources. Public favorability of wind and solar is in the 90% range. And we've all seen the proliferation of renewable portfolio standards in state energy policy, let alone what's going on in the energy bill. And to be sure, renewable energy sources have a role in our electricity portfolio. But to quote an excellent op-ed published last month in the Washington Post by former Energy Secretary James Schlesinger and energy analyst Robert Hirsch, quote, "Some serious realism in energy planning is needed." Increased energy efficiency will play an important role in managing load growth, and as you heard Chairman Wellinghoff say, demand response is a critical thing too. But even with smaller projected increases in electricity demand tied to slower economic growth, the United States will still need 20 to 25% more electricity by 2030. The Electric Power Research Institute examined measures that are technically feasible for reducing carbon dioxide emissions, assuming there are no economic or policy constraints. It identified a mix of advanced technologies that could reduce CO2 emissions up to 45% by 2030, an incredibly ambitious attempt. To achieve that goal, nuclear energy's share of the electric generation would increase to 25%, increase by 25%, or by about 64 gigawatts. In addition, you'd have to have full carbon capture and sequestration technology commercially available by 2020. And renewables must increase from 3% to almost 7% nationwide. More recently, the Environmental Protection Agency did an analysis of the Waxman-Markey climate change bill that's being debated right now. And what they came to in their analysis was the need for 180 new nuclear power plants to meet the carbon reduction goals by 2050. Those are in addition to what you have today plus replacement for what we have. That's 4 to 5 plants a year if you were going to do what they projected. All credible analyses of our energy and climate policy recognize the need to expand the use of nuclear energy. We all know there are significant challenges that we must overcome to do so, but the industry